Tonight in First Timothy, we continue our study of how one is to conduct themselves in the house of God, in the church of God, which is the pillar and support of the truth. And tonight our study brings us to chapter 3, of which we'll find that Paul describes the qualities of the man who would be suitable for the noble work of being an elder. In New American Standard, it says there in verse 1 that if a man desires that work, the work of an overseer, it's a fine work that he desires to do. Comparing some newer translations, and in the English Standard, it says it's a noble work. And of all the translations I've seen, I think I like that the best. So we've taken that as a title tonight, a noble work. Let's read the first 7 verses of 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy chapter 3, beginning verse 1. It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of an overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectful, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach and a snare of the devil. So we'll take that, as you see on the screen, in 4 parts that's to be honored. We'll ask the question, why aren't more men qualified? We'll see how the work as described in the New Testament determines the qualifications that are needed to do the work. And then we'll look at the text of the required qualities. So it's a trustworthy statement. This is our second trustworthy statement from Paul in the book of 1 Timothy. He had said back in chapter 1, it was a trustworthy statement deserving of full acceptance that Christ Jesus came to the world to save sinners, among whom I'm the foremost or the chief. And so this trustworthy statement, it is used, construction used several times by Paul. He'll use it twice more in his letters to Timothy in chapter 4, after saying godliness is a means of great gain, in spiritual things particularly. He'll say that's a trustworthy statement deserving of full acceptance. He'll also say in 2 Timothy 2, it's a trustworthy statement that if we die with him, we will live with him. And so this construction and reminder of a thing being a trustworthy statement, that doesn't mean the other statements are untrustworthy, because all are given by inspiration of God, but it's a point of special note. It's a gold star truth. And so here it is about the office of an overseer. So a thing of church governance is given the same highlighted treatment as the gospel being for all to be saved by, for godliness being of great importance, and for fidelity to Christ in suffering so that he would reward us when done. So it is truly then a fine or a noble work. In other places, we're told about this, that if one is an elder who rules well, which tells us a little bit about their job there, they rule, that they're to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And so there might be a preaching and teaching aspect to the elder's work. In 1 Thessalonians 5, the brethren are told to appreciate those who diligently labor among you and have charge over you in the Lord and give you instruction, that you esteem them very highly in love because of their work. And it says with that, live in peace with one another. How to help out the guys in charge? Be at peace with them and everybody else. But appreciate them and esteem them and love them. But we note it's a diligent labor that they're to do, and it's to have charge over these things in the church. In Hebrews 13, it says to obey your leaders and to submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls, as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not grief, for this would not be profitable for you. And so obey and submit. We're going to talk in a moment about why more men aren't qualified. And in some places, they can go a very long time without elders. I've been at places without elders many times and for extended periods. And one of the things that I think keep us from having elders is this instruction that goes with this noble office, this noble work of Hebrews 13:17. Obey and submit. This is a job to which we are to obey, we are to submit, we are to love, we are to esteem, we are to appreciate. And I think there's a lot of folks, they don't like esteeming, they don't appreciate others who lead them, they do not want to submit. We know this is a problem in our society today. It's always been some conflict between men and women and the roles of the sexes and things like that. But now, especially with modern liberated feminism and the so-called red-pilled men who are fighting back against this, and we find one of the consequences is people are delaying marriage. And one of the things both for those who, both men and women, who are delaying their marriage, women are directly saying they don't want to submit. They don't want to be under the leadership of a man. And there are men who are saying they don't want to be leaders. They don't want to lead, especially these ladies who don't want to be led. And so it's become a problem. It's a societal-wide problem, but it's not just in the home. It's all through society where people do not want to submit. People do not want to have someone else appointed a leader. And in some congregations, who appoints the leaders? Well, if we don't have an eldership, the business meeting of men will appoint an eldership. And I have seen business meetings of men go through all kind of lengths to not appoint a leader over them. So long as there's a business meeting, they have a vote. They have a bit of the role of leader. They don't have anybody that they're particularly required to submit to. And so I have seen a lot of places in a lot of times where there were men who certainly do appear to be qualified, although you don't know all people and all circumstances and all things, but there would certainly appear to be at some point over the decades some men who would have been qualified as leaders, yet the other fellows never decided to let them be the leader. And so partly, why aren't more men qualified? Well, sometimes they're shot down because people don't want to obey. They don't want to submit. They don't want to be followers. And so this causes people to not understand or appreciate this noble work. Now, sometimes there's a fault. Why aren't men more qualified? More men qualified for it. Sometimes there has been a lack of concern. The type of qualities here, especially with a well-run family that men are to have in order to be qualified, so that requires work over a long term. That requires some foresight and commitment to the development process. That requires study for a long time. And sometimes at the formative years or the formative times of manhood where a man might have developed these things, he wasn't concerned. And by the time he became concerned, the opportunities might have passed him by. But when churches don't use this office, when churches resist those who have this office, when it says they keep watch over your souls as those who give an account, let them do it with joy and not grief, for it would not be profitable for you. I have known of cases where men say, I wouldn't want to lead that group. I wouldn't want to be responsible for that. The grief in it is too much. They think that it would be deleterious to their own effect, to their own affairs, to their own spirit to lead these folks. And they say, no, I'm not going to do it. And so we know that Paul, as we'll talk about elders again when we come to to Titus. To Titus 1, Paul told Timothy, for this reason I left you in Crete, that you set in order what remains. If we don't have elders, we have something lacking. There's something remaining. There is something wanting. And some people don't mind that, especially if they're not the one who's going to be allowed to supply it. So when the office is not honored, we'll find a shortage of elders. Those who rule well and teach and preach, Paul said, have them be worthy to you of double honor. Well, some folks don't want honor the first time, much less twice. And so these qualifications are used in some quarters and sometimes, not as the qualities required, but as the reason to disqualify. We look to see how we can disqualify a person, and we use this list as a bunch of potential red marks against them, rather than look to see how they are qualified. We look to see how they don't meet up, rather than how they do. And so we think about the graciousness of God, such as Psalm 130. Oh Lord, who could stand if you would mark iniquities? Well, nobody could, because we can always find a fault. The Lord could always find fault, and more fault with us. And for any potential candidate to be an elder, I bet you we could always find fault. And then in some occasions, there's a little bit of a mug's game that's played by, I think, brethren, with a bit of dishonesty. They'll say, well, okay, that guy qualifies to be an elder. He could be an elder. But of course, we know in elders, there's always a plurality. It's an eldership, not an elder rule. It's a rule by an eldership. It's a rule by a group of bishops. We have a number of words here that all work to the same effect. And so we can get the one guy who's the magic candidate who can qualify, but we make sure that he would never have a qualified partner. So, oh yeah, we'd love to have elders here. Brother Smith would be a great elder. Unfortunately, Brother Jones and Brother Edwards and, all these other brothers, none of them that were put forth, none of them qualify. And so, yes, Brother Tom, but no, not Brother Dick, not Brother Harry, not Brother whoever else. And so, if we seek to disqualify by these texts, we'll probably have a reason to disqualify. And so, actually, I just noticed a note in my notes here from another time. A notable preacher, he had such a dim view on elders that one time he was told by a member of another congregation, the member said to the preacher, he said, we have 3 good elders here. And the brother replied, well, I've never met 3 good elders in all my life. As it turns out, that preacher who said that, and would be of some note, and some of y'all would recognize his name if I said it. Turns out that preacher hardly ever worked in 60-year career of ministry. He probably worked with elders less than about 7 years of his entire time in ministry, because he had such a dim view of elders. And I think part of it is, though he was a notable preacher, he didn't like that submission and being led. He liked to lead himself. And that's a fault of a number of us, especially preachers. So, what do we do with the scriptures? Well, we look at what the job is, and then we look and see how the qualifications meet that job. Now, this is the scriptural job of elder. Also, we'll have other scriptural words with this, eldership or presbytery, the plural words of that. We'll also have the word overseer or bishop. I think a good, another modern English word, it's not used in very many Bible translations, but a good Bible would be administrator. And we also, of course, have a shepherd or pastor. Because in English we often have this double or triple vocabulary, where we have a number of words to describe the same thing. So a pastor and a shepherd are the same thing. We have a plethora of words to choose from, and we might see it in any number of different translations. But basically we have 3 scriptural designations. 3 scriptural designations And then in English, we have multiple words for each of those designations. Now, the first one is the word presbyter, comes from the Greek word presbyteros, and it just means elder. Elder can mean, in some contexts, just an aged man, just the older fellow in the group, or the old fellows. It might also mean a place of informal authority, like some of the Jewish elders in various villages that we run across in Old and New Testament both. But sometimes that is an official authority. That elder is an official role, and there were Jewish officials who were called elders, and also there are Christian officials who are called elders. In Acts 11:30, we run across them, that the charity of the church at Antioch was sent by Barnabas and Saul to the elders. In Acts 14:23, they appointed elders in every church. So elder, of course, that one is one that not too many people religiously get wrong. The Mormons are a famous exception, sending the 18-year-olds to your house under the name of elder. But elder, older man. So first thing, he's a person of age, and he's a person of experience. There isn't a necessary, no direct teaching of what the age should be. I have known some who served as elders in the Lord's church from the year of 45. I have known some 45-year-old elders. I used to say that I only knew those who end badly, but I now know a couple who are that young that didn't turn out badly. But that seems to be quite the minimum age. Most elders are in their 60s or 70s, and some, of course, are quite more elder than that. We also have another word for this is we have the plural presbyteron, so the presbyteros, presbyteron, and so we have those who in a group lead. And so that is one thing we do note, that it is a group in the Lord's church. It's always a group. It's never been, and we never see anything other than a group of elders. And the group is sometimes just like Philippians 1 to the bishops and the deacons. It's plural. Or 1 Timothy 4 will have the prophetic gift that came to Timothy when he had his hands laid on him by the presbytery, or by the eldership. And so we have single and plural about elders. We also have then episkopos, which is bishop or overseer. As I've said, a good modern English word might also be an administrator or superintendent or guardian. And so the fella in charge. And so this is something that was used more from the business world. The old King James will say bishop, and that's a word we've relegated almost entirely to religious things. Not too many bishops out there, except on a chessboard or in a church organization. But we certainly would have today a lot of superintendents, right? Like the superintendent of schools or the school board, that kind of thing. We have these administrators. And so that word is mentioned in Acts 20 and verse 28, where the brethren there, Paul talked to, were made overseers of the church. We also have Titus chapter 1, the overseer must be above reproach. We also have that same word appear in 1 Peter chapter 2, 25, talking about the shepherd and guardian of our souls. There, that word is applied to Christ in his shepherding role, but we can see how that applies also to elders. Then we have the word pomion in Greek, which is shepherd or pastor, again, because we have multiple words in English for a thing. So the shepherd or the pastor. And so our shepherds or our pastors are the same as our elders and our bishops. In a lot of denominational structures, these titles are farmed out to several people, so that one gets to be the bishop, and one gets to be the elder, and one gets to be the overseer. And depending on the group, you need to know what the org chart looks like to know which title is above another. But in the New Testament, the org chart's pretty simple. It's all one group of people who have multiple titles explaining the different roles that they have. So the pastor, the shepherd, the one who feeds, the one who oversees and protects the flock. So, going back to a long time, Israel was God was the shepherd of Israel. They were the sheep of his pasture. The Lord is my shepherd, famously in Psalm 23, I'll not want. And so that figure is used for spiritual leadership, going back a long way and starting with God. And so the spiritual leaders of the congregations, they are likewise here given as shepherds or as pastors. It's interesting that in the religious world, most denominations, there's a single one man who is the pastor. Very seldom does he meet all the qualifications of this passage, though he might be a man who's working on them. But that is the one part of all of this that is most commonly used as a title. Again, though, it's used so much that many people think the preacher is a pastor because there's a confusion of those roles. They are overlapping in many ways. There's a lot of overlap in what a preacher is to be and an elder is. In many ways, the qualifications of a preacher is to be a man working on the type of qualities the elder already possesses. But the preacher has oversight of his teaching, while the elder has oversight of the church. And of course, if the preacher is working under elders at a church, they have oversight of his teaching, and so does he. And hopefully that works together because they're teaching the same doctrine. But that's where a lot of conflicts sometimes come in. So the shepherd is a common figure. Ephesians 4, Acts 20, 1 Peter 5, others. There are some other, as we noted with the Hebrews passage, there are places where these people are called leaders or rulers. 1 Thessalonians 5, the first Timothy passage we mentioned, the elders who rule well, so they're rulers. Also, Hebrews 11:7, remember those who led you, as well as Hebrews 13:7, as well as Hebrews 13:17, so two passages from Hebrews. There's a number of places where we find these people to be teachers as well. And then one more, 1 Peter 5, the elders are supposed to be examples. So that's the job, and that's where we're going to need these qualifications. The job is to be the elder, so something of age, position, maturity. He's to be the overseer or be the bishop of a thing, the administrator, the superintendent, so he's in charge of the oversight. He's in charge of feeding and protecting. That's the pastor-shepherd role. He's the ruler. He's a teacher, and he's an example. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there. In so many ways, the elders are really for us the picture of Christ in our congregation. So if we think, who is Christ-like here? Who is fulfilling the roles that Christ fills for his people? Who is doing that among this local outpost, this local gathering, this local piece of the flock? It's the elders who do that and should be that. Some might say, well, the preacher's supposed to be that. Well, in a way he is. In a lot of ways, the preacher's, if there's an Old Testament model, he's more like the prophet. But in so many ways, the elders are pictures of Christ in the local church. And that really is what I think Peter talks about when he says that you shepherds, you keep doing your work faithfully until the chief shepherd appears. And so I don't know of too many roles in places where the preacher has a divine description that's the same as a divine description of Christ. You might find one for me that I've overlooked, but I know for a fact that the elder and Christ share the same divine description of shepherds of the people. So then what are the required qualities for a person to be this? Now, again, we could take endless amounts of time and do this. I did pull some of my old notes on this to review for tonight. And I found in my archives a 70-page, 7-lesson outline about a series of lessons on the eldership. And so, no, we won't go through the 70 pages in 7 weeks. We'll leave the 70s and the 7s for the prophecies of Daniel, and we'll just look at this text. But we will note that there is a pretty thoroughgoing set of qualities required. And I think maybe that's a better description and way to look at it, rather than say, these are the qualifications, because then we start thinking checklist. And we think, well, yes, yes, and no, especially if you would use this as a checklist to disqualify. Not that there aren't men who we should disqualify, but to approach it that way, I think, sets it up as a test that'll only fail, is the wrong approach. So we do have, though, what a man must be. So what are the required qualities an overseer then must be? Well, he must be above reproach. The King James says he has to be blameless. It's the same word, same root as we get our word justified. He's justified. And so God counts us as just, as a gift, by faith in Jesus Christ, right? We're counted as just. We're counted as righteous. But at the root of that is a person who can't be charged. And so the fellow who would be an elder, he needs to be a fellow we can't make a bunch of charges against. Now, again, some people will make charges about anything against anybody. We know that there's special protections for the elders, that a charge is not to be brought without multiple witnesses, because once somebody is a leader or would be a leader, well, everybody tries to tear them down. So it's not that somebody couldn't say something to try and tear them down, but can they say something credibly about this fellow to point out a glaring fault? So blameless here is there. Pardon. Blameless here is there would be no glaring fault. There would be nothing that he could be easily and credibly accused of failure of character in things of the way of Christ. Then he's the husband of one wife. Now, there's lots of different variations about things about widowers and things about people scripturally divorced and the like that people get into with this. I think the main thing is he's married to a woman, and he's a one-woman man. Some have described it as, I've summarized it as, he has abided by God's law on marriage. And so I think it might be up to a more local situation, whether, hey, if a fellow scripturally divorced, what would you do with that? Well, I think that might be the congregation's decision, although I haven't seen it happen very often. So most folks aren't evidently going to go with that. But I think most people don't have a problem with the widower who's remarried, because he's been the husband, well, technically of two wives, but he's done what God has said in marriage. I do think this quality here does come into play in some other cultures besides just Western ones, in places where people have had multiple wives. There are places even today in the world where there are polygamous people. And if you had converts who had been polygamous, I think that guy's not going to be an elder, right? So you're somebody who has followed what God says on marriage. You're temperate, or the old King James will say vigilant. He's somebody who is in control of himself. He's not somebody out of control. He's prudent or sober. And so he is a man of sense. He is a man who acts like he has his head on straight. He has a proper balance of mind. He's respectable, or the King James says, of good behavior. He knows how to act. He doesn't overact. He doesn't react too much, or he's not unmoved by things. He has a proper amount of reaction to serious things. I think we've all known, particularly some of the younger fellas, and when I say younger, I mean some guys under 40. They like to still kind of roughhouse with the not just their kids but other kids, and I've seen people really offend people like that, and we think, well, that guy needs to calm down. Well, the elder's a guy who's calmed down, right? He's not somebody who still acts that way. There's not that kind of immaturity about him. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean, hey, you remember 10 years ago how he used to be? Well, maybe not, but what is he now? What's he proven to be? So probably on a number of these things, there should be a statute of some limitations, right? Uh, but a lot of times brethren have real good memories about especially things that were wrong. And that's not always so helpful. And so he's hospitable. There's a love of strangers. That's a common command in the New Testament, to be hospitable, to show that love of strangers, to be able, or the King James says, be apt to teach. So he has some ability of teaching. There's often a teaching section, a teaching part in the elder's work. Titus will tell us, or in Titus we'll be told, he needs to be able to refute the gainsayer. And so if somebody comes in teaching erroneous doctrine, he needs to be able to tell why that's wrong. Now, that doesn't mean he needs to be a full-time or regular preacher. There's a lot of folks who are able to teach, and there's a lot of places where teaching needs to be done. It could be public teaching, could be private teaching, could be small group teaching. Is he a fellow who is able and willing to teach? If he's not a teacher at all, though, he's not, I don't think, the elder type, but he's somebody who has the ability. It's not about masterful speaking, but it's about being able to speak for the master, right? He needs to do that. So then, not addicted to wine or pugnacious. Not addicted to wine and not being a guy, King James says, a striker. Those two things seem to go together as a pair, because what happens when so many people get a little bit of alcohol in them? And so they get a little belligerent. So he's not a belligerent person, and he's not addicted, or the King James says he's not given to wine. Now in this, we again could spend a very long amount of time on, well, what does it mean not addicted to? There's two things that this could possibly be, because we certainly know the New Testament forbids drunkenness, right? Just outright says, don't get drunk with wine. That's Ephesians 5:18. So it's somebody certainly who is not drunk. That's not who they are. Again, not that anybody who's ever been drunk is automatically disqualified from ever being an elder, but drunkenness is not who they are. It's not what they do. But here it's something quite a bit less than that in not being addicted or given to it. So it doesn't seem drinking any kind of wine, and again in the New Testament wine was a general term, meant both the fermented and the unfermented. Here, in that there's an addiction to it, it certainly seems it's most likely, especially when it's given with striker as its pairing, that it is the alcoholic form of wine. So here's not a person who drinks a lot. He's not one who drinks a lot. Now, some people say, oh, you can't say that because that would seem to leave room for people who do want to drink some. Well, what do we make of the prohibition here against a stronger form of a thing? Well, it depends on what you believe about the thing in general. And I'm not going to change your mind on that either way. It's hard to have an unbiased opinion on this. Sometimes when we forbid the stronger form of a thing, we mean don't have anything to do with it at all. If I tell my kids, don't get stoned, and I say, Dad, I wasn't smoking enough of that to get stoned. Okay, fine. You're good. You weren't blitzed out of your mind. You're good. No. When I forbid the strong version of a thing, am I clearing the way for the lesser version of a thing? Right? So some people say, yes, obviously, when he forbids the stronger version, that doesn't clear the way and approve the weaker version. But other people who have a different view say, of course, he only forbid what's actually forbidden. Right? So if you forbid the addiction to it, the being given to it, then you didn't say anything at all about the more moderate forms of drinking, did you? You only forbid the stronger. You didn't expressly say anything at all about the lesser, and so the lesser we're free to do as we wish. Well, when it comes to this, it's really going to come to your view of the use of modern intoxicants. Now, we do know in the scripture times, drinking wine at the table was the common drink, and that did have some alcohol in it. It didn't have anything near like what's in a modern bottle of wine. Those things have been souped up with lots of sugar to get the alcohol content way up. Then we know in ancient times, they would cut the water with the wine. They would mix water and wine together. The only way one with what was served at the table, which did have some content of alcohol to it, the only way you could get drunk of that was really trying to, drinking a lot of it. And so, like today, you have the fellow who has the 12-ounce can of a Coca-Cola, and then you have the other guy who has the 44-ounce from Sonic of Coca-Cola. Well, if you have that 44-ounce drink at every meal, what's going to happen, right? Well, just go ahead and get your prescription for your diabetes pills coming, because that's not healthy. But it's like, dude, just cut that back some, right? Cut that back. And that's not even alcoholic. That's just sugar. But in the ancient world, same type thing. If you had what was served at the table, you had the normal amount, yes, there would be what we would consider to be very weak amounts of alcohol in it. But what if a person had the 44-ouncer and then had a refill? And he did that again for dinner, right? We got a problem. And so I think that is the original setting and context. How does that apply in today's world where nobody serves alcohol that's of that weak a content? Where because we have so many other options that aren't alcoholic, that if someone puts alcohol on the table, it's quite purposeful. And it's also quite a bit, not quite a bit, but a whole lot stronger. And so I think caution should be used. So I don't think this is an absolute prohibition against any kind of alcoholic use. In the ancient world, that simply wasn't so. And they didn't have hardly any wine that wasn't fermented, not until 1830s when Mr. Welch figured out how to pasteurize grape juice, right? We didn't have, as a long-term, as a common option, things from the grape that didn't harden up. It just naturally happened. We can stop that now. Well, why wouldn't you? So what is the use and benefit of alcohol in our society? Well, not much. In ancient times, it was a different setting. It was a different set of facts and different set of things on the table. All right, I probably spent too much time on that anyway, and probably did enough to make everybody not quite happy. But in any case, he's not a guy who's much of a drinker. He's not also, he instead, and he's not a striker. And I think, again, it's probably important those two things go together because it shows us what alcohol does. All right, so then instead he's gentle. So he doesn't strike. He doesn't fight. He's a gentle, patient person. He's not contentious. He's not looking to stir up trouble. He's free of the love of money. Well, he's going to be overseeing the church funds. And, most churches have some kind of basic protections about the money. There's if not a formal audit, there are reports of some people count the money, some people deposit the money, and then several people hopefully look to see where the money was spent, right? Some just basic things to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Well, this guy, he needs to not be a greedy guy, because especially in the ancient world where everything's just done in coins, how easy would it be to put a coin in your pocket? And what if you put a coin or two in your pocket every week? One time saw a case of a church elder charged with crime eventually. He had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from his congregation. And nobody ever knew. Nobody suspected for so very long. It was about a 25-year period where the guy was taking money. And what he was doing was taking $50 to $100 every week out of the collection plate. But it was 50 or 100 every week for 20, 25 years. That'll add up, right? That'll add up. So if we have a guy who is greedy, how many safeguards can we have to keep him out of the till? Well, you can't hardly have enough safeguards, can you? Because what if you turn your back just the once? So we just need somebody who isn't of that character. We need somebody who manages his own house well, keeping his children in control with dignity. So his children obey, not because he'll beat them, not because he's some kind of raving and abusive monster, but because they respect him. So he runs a respectable house in a respectable way. And here it says, but if the man doesn't know how to manage his own house, how will he take care of the house of God? So the home, in so many ways, is the proving ground for his ability to lead. Can he lead his family? Does his wife respect him? Do his children respect him? Do they follow his suggestions? When they depart from the right way, how does he bring them back to it? Just, well, they're going to do what they're going to do. Well, what do you do when some of the members depart from the right way? Well, they're going to do what they're going to do, right? Or do you like the good shepherd? Do you go out and seek the lost? And so responding to how things have gone wrong at home. So it's not that his home is so perfect that nothing's ever had to be corrected, but what did he do to correct it? How effective was he at correction? Because that's going to be a big part of the elder's job, right? A gentle correction, hopefully gentle, and effective, hopefully, correction when people are not on the proper path. So look at how he runs his house. What does that tell you about how he'll run the church? And then he has to be not a new convert. So he can't be someone who's just been here a short time. Even if he's off to a good start, he has to have been around long enough to have been proven, lest he become conceited and fall into the condemnation of the devil, the condemnation incurred by the devil, some translations say. So because you're the leader, and if you have a large congregation and you're one of the leaders of that, that's a big thing that might appeal to pride, puff you up. And so we need to have some protection against that. And knowing them a long time and having experience with them, that can be an important safeguard. I have known people who, once they became an elder, became terribly puffed up about it, became officious, became really troublesome to everybody, throwing their weight around as the guy in charge. And that guy wasn't a novice. I have seen that occur, and it was a terrible thing for the congregation, and the year and a half or so that it took to get that situation straightened out. And so again, he wasn't a novice, but he fell into this sin. He was removed from the office. He then ended up living a much longer and faithful life, not in this role. And so just because a person, in this case, he fell as an elder and he fell to this sin, it wasn't irretrievably lost. It has worked out well for him and his family, although like so many other times and things things like this, it ended up working out in another place because his name there was, kind of soiled. But yes, that can happen. We've seen it happen, even if they're not a novice. But a novice is especially prone to that. Last thing, verse 7. He must have a good reputation with those outside the church. So here's the one thing that mentions not in the church. All this other is Christian character, Christian virtue, Christian teaching, devotion. But now, outside of the church, he also has to be a good reputation. And so if he has a business, what's the reputation of his business? He's going to be a representative of the church and of Christ to the people that he lives around. Not just the people that he meets with on Sunday, but the people he lives with and interacts with the rest of the time. What do they think about this guy? And I've known some people who have been elders in the Lord's church, and it turns out the community didn't think much about them. It didn't help the church at all where they were. And it turns out, in a couple of occasions that I know of, the community was right. The community was right, and the brethren should have taken more notice of that, as this qualification says. I knew another man one time, he wanted to be an elder and did not become one, but there was a thing that was happening with the congregation, and somebody said something about, the neighbors, the people in and around the building, the neighborhood where the church building was. Well, the neighbors, their feelings on this have to be taken into account, and their view of right and judgment, sound judgment, and reasonable judgment. And this guy said, I don't care what the neighbors think. It's like, well, I don't think you should be an elder then. How we portray Christ to the community, our place in the community, is important to us. Now, again, in some places there's persecution and there's all kind of slander against the church. I'm not saying that you have to make the slanderer happy, because you can't, but you have to at least consider those outside. Those outside will definitely be considering you when they think of Christ and the church that you represent. So, unfortunately, I've I think, given too many bad examples here of where things can go sideways. We shouldn't look at this list as, well, all the potential ways this could go sideways. And we can't use this, again, just as a list to disqualify anybody who might be interested in serving. Because if we want to do that, we probably can, and make sure we never have elders again. I don't think that's the plan, is it? So, as younger men, men with families, and in your families, look at this kind of as a spiritual checklist, a to-do list, right? This is what you're aiming for. This is what a mature man in Christ would look like. Are you headed on that path? What would help you get to that? What would help you become one of these people? If there are people who do hold this office and you're interested ever, you think, talk to them. Say, hey, you're an elder. You think I could be one? If I want to be one in whatever many years or soon or whatever, what do you think I would need to do? What do you think I could work on? Look at it from that perspective, and then do desire, as Paul said, if you desire this, it is a noble work you desire. We should desire it. We should want it because it is such a good thing. Not because it lifts us up, but it's a place of great service. And what are we supposed to do in Christ? Right? We do love, serve one another. So with that, we have our first part of chapter 3, our noble work. In the eldership, we have something about deacons and about the women in our next segment. And so that will be the further study.